Welcome to the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we explore what it means to be a well-rounded, happy, goal-crushing athlete. Every week, myself, sports journalist Molly Herford, and cycling coach and kinesiologist Peter Glassford interview experts and chat through all of your training questions. We're excited to have you along for the ride. Hello. Welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. Super stoked for another Q&A episode today. Today we are talking all about doing intervals on the mountain bike, which is a topic that we are always very excited to get back into. I feel like it's just one of those that keeps coming up, especially as now we're pretty much riding, outside for most of our rides. And we're also talking about what counts as a one training session with a stop. Yes. Versus two training sessions where you've stopped in the middle of them.
That's right. You could call that the beer and the burrito, I guess.
We'll get into that.
Okay.
But before we do, Peter, how's it going?
It's going well. We had the first Ontario World Championships of the World Cup race.
I mean, to be fair, it was kind of a...
It had hints of the good old days. It may have been the fastest average speed recorded, which is a very Ontario thing.
And a star-studded field.
That's right.
World Tour racing.
Let's say the winner of the largest crit in Windsor was there. Let's just leave it at that. And then the Clark brothers, who are also very fast. Owen's just off of a big Pan Am win, was there. And then his brother Tyler, also very, very good. I'm blanking on... No, Tyler didn't win. Orschel won, yeah. And then Tyler Orschel was there, who also has had a UCI win recently and has a new Puerto Rican puppy that he has imported. I'm not sure if there's tariffs on that, but enough said. And who else was there? Dylan Kerr, of course. Consummate athlete Dylan Kerr.
I like that you still haven't actually dropped the Windsor crit champion of the world.
Everyone knows who won the biggest crit in Windsor. Noah Ramsey was also there and put in a good showing despite his road training, which has brought him away from the mountain bike. He was there and put in a good form. I think he was second, if I remember right. Yeah, Orschel got him. We'll say that was like a home course Orschel win. And then I was eighth, I think, back there. I kept up for a little while, and then I sort of got tired and had to take a rest, and then I came back, and it was okay. It was a good race. But it honestly, people... There was some grumbling. They combined some categories, so they're sort of like the sport and the experts they combined. And there's a little bit of grumbling, and I get it. It's hard to find your perfect race. But I think for a lot of people, they want that perfect race to be like they're on top of the podium and no one else is racing them maybe. And so I thought it was just fantastic. It was hard mentally, right? It's like I'm in the middle of the pack. I can't even see where the front is. But at the same time, I'm in my 40s and it's an elite race. I shouldn't be at the front of this race. It should be really fast like that. And it was great. It was fantastic. It was really, really good weekend.
It's that weird, what is that Oscar Wilde quote where it's like, I don't want to be in a club that would have me kind of thing.
Sure.
Like you are now at a point in your career where, if you're at the race and you're the clear winner or you're not racing anyone, it's sort of sad for that race.
I think so. I think it's like these
You're still very fast. Don't get me wrong.
Well, I mean, I did get shout-outs. I had rigged the announcers. I had friends with Eric Lehman, our friend here in Collingwood, and John Barnes, my teammate. He did a string on the announcing as well. And then we had Iceman, who is Tyler Orschel's father, also was giving me lots of kudos. So that helped get me around the course for sure, that they were giving me kudos for being out there and giving her a good try.
Yeah, and a couple more races coming up where you're doing another Ontario Cup at Hardwood Hills next weekend, so we'll be out there for that. So definitely come up, say hi. Pre-apologies when the dog barks at you, but we'll give you treats to say hello to him.
And then the subsequent weekend is your race. That's May 24 or 5.
Yeah, I think Saturday. 24th, whatever that day is.
And that's down in Ancaster, so where the Paris to Ancaster finishes. So if you're out on a bike ride or you live in that area, come on by. I'll be hanging out most of the day waiting for Molly. She'll come through every couple hours to the top of Martin Road there. So if you're looking to kill time, come and hunt us down and cheer Molly on.
Yeah, how are you feeling for that 25 miles you're going to have to put in?
Well, I'm thinking I'm going to block a little bit this week, so try and front end this week off of the race, maybe get a little bit of adaptation, super compensation for the Hardwood World Championships of the World Cup number 2, and then we'll see how the running goes, but you keep assuring me it won't be that fast, and I'm concerned it will be. By the time I have already done 20K, it'll be pretty fast.
I sincerely doubt it on the grounds that it will be dark and I will be very tired.
Yes.
So,
So
I think you're going to
the
be
way
fine.
these 100-milers work, if you remember, there's pacers that come in at some point. Sometimes it's halfway through. Sometimes it's at darkness. In this race, you said it was at a time of day or a certain number of laps completed.
Yeah.
So Molly's going to do 8 laps, and then it's the last 3?
2.
2. Or after a certain time of day.
Yeah, so after 8 p.m. or for lap 7 and 8. So it sort of just depends on when you're hitting lap 7.
Which is something I really like about running. You know, in biking, I don't know, you wouldn't really... But you could see something like that in like a 24-hour race. They just say the solo riders have to ride at night with a teammate or something. It would be an interesting dynamic. I think it would be maybe a toss-up safety-wise if it makes it better or worse. But sometimes people have some rough moments there in the forest, even in something like a 24-hour. So it'd be an interesting thing if you had to have a pacer come with you for the nighttime, and then maybe they open it back up in the morning.
I really worry how much you're thinking about this, like, backyard ultra for bikes kind of thought
don't
process.
Spoil my idea.
I know.
Although I am trying to give it away. So.
Yeah, so if someone wants to talk to Peter about a backyard bike ultra,
That's right.
get in touch. Meanwhile, Shred Girls Book 4, Lindsay and the Curse of Gemini Lakes, is also out May 27th, so only a couple weeks away. I will still be very tired from racing, which is nice because that means I can just sit and, book launch all day. But then actually the weekend after that race, the 31st, so May 31st, we are having a Shred Girls launch party over at the Mansfield Outdoor Center. And it is like a packed day because we're teaming up with N89 Trail Running to do a kids race. So that's going to kind of kick off the camp, and that's for all kids. And then we have our Shred Girls weekend or Shred Girls Day for just the girls. And that's going to have a amazing bike scavenger hunt I'm very excited about. Some really cool people are coming out, and we're actually working with For All Mothers to do a mom's run and chat in the afternoon that Dr. Sasha Golish, my co-host for the Strong Girl Talk podcast, is going to lead. So that's going to be really fun as well. And even if you're not coming for the Shred Girls weekend, you can still sign up for that. So you can find out more. We'll put a link in the show notes or stronggirlpublishing.com/summer-2025. I'm pretty excited about that and really thankful for our sponsor, Payable, who is not just sponsoring the podcast, but also came on board to sponsor the event as well. So actually, if you register, you will notice that you are using a Payable form. So Payable is a way to take payments using a Google form. It's super convenient, especially for something like that where, I'm not starting an event business. I'm just running an event. I need to collect some information about campers, and I need to take some payments. So the easiest way to do that wasn't to build out a whole events page on the website and, do WooCommerce this or this, that, and the other thing, or use an actual event reg site. It was just to build out a Google form for it. And Payable, because, we've worked at them, there's already free templates for the Google form for event registration in their template library.
Or for March break camp or something.
Exactly. Yeah. So payableapps.com/athlete, you can see kind of all of the templates that we like using, whether it's for t-shirts, jerseys, events, all that kind of stuff. A lot of stuff for teachers in there, a lot of stuff for nonprofits who don't want to have to deal with, figuring out all of the different ways to set up fundraising sites.
Well, I'll even give you an example. We're at the race. I'll throw them under the bus, I guess. We're at the race. They're doing the pre-rides, which are paid separately this past weekend. And you had to make a login for some app that I'll never use again. I had to make an app, a password, and just to pay $10. And so the great thing is that Molly uses this with her books like that, is you can sort of just have a QR code or however you want to set it up. You just get someone's name, and then the book price could be set up in your form. And they basically are at a checkout that would go through like a normal checkout. You just enter your card or take a picture of the card or whatever. So it's sort of this thing where sometimes people end up with way too complicated or the wrong application, especially for a point of, when someone's in person.
Yeah, exactly. So I love it for, in-person book sales, even though, they have to open the Google form on their phone and run through it. Because I don't do in-person sales that often, it doesn't make sense for me to have a Square Reader and a whole other separate app or whatever. And the cool thing is they can just use their own phone to pay. So I am never looking at their credit card. I am never checking their credit card information. They're just showing me the little paid thing.
Right.
And boom, they get their book. So it's super convenient. So definitely check it out. Payableapps.com/athlete. And there are some deals and breaks on pricing on there, although payable, it does not make money unless you do, which is probably my other reason I really like it. No subscription BS. Okay, into our questions here. So this one is how to train and do intervals for mountain bike, marathon, and endurance racing, 24-hour races, stuff like that. This person has had their coach in the past suggest intervals on the trainer, but we've obviously talked about on this podcast doing them outside. How does that work? And you know what? Like at first glance, I'm like, well, obviously you just go and you ride hard on the mountain bike trail. But then I think about the trails and it's not that obvious. For example, where we are, one of our major trail systems at Pretty River is really very up or down and very twisty and very technical. And like for you, you can do an interval on it, no problem, like going up. For me, I'm not going to be able to get up. I'm going to have to get off the bike. I'm going to have to run it over some stuff. Like, I'm just going to be struggling a lot more with the technical terrain, and it's going to be a lot harder for me to maintain any kind of pace. So, how do you think about it?
Well, so I always think now about when people ask this question of the kid who was like, we were learning how to do intervals, and so we went to the local gravel hill, and the kids, after 2 reps, was like, is this like Zwift? And I said, what do you mean? And I guess he meant that you do workouts on Zwift or these softwares on your smart trainer. And so it was sort of a paradigm shift where that just seemed like sort of a weird thing to say to me. But where that athlete is coming from is probably, as many young athletes now, their parents can't be with them at all times. They can't go out and ride on their own these days, I guess, or they're very young. Maybe at any time they wouldn't. So a lot of them, that is like their first exposure to like a workout is they ride their trainer and they do either a Zwift race or a workout or something. And so I get it, right? It's the same as it used to be with spin class. Like someone would be like, oh, we do stuff like this in spin class.
Okay, so I was so ahead of my time. Like 10 years ago, my friend and I started like a Tumblr account called Throwdown. That was basically the Onion for sports stuff. And the first story we did on it was like, oh my gosh, this stationary bike works outside. And it was talking about like, riding a bike outdoors.
Oh, okay. But like you're taking your bike off the trainer.
Yeah, you're just like surprised that bikes exist out in the world because you're just used to, like a Peloton class or like a Soul Cycle. And it just did not catch on. And I feel like if I'd been like a year later or if I'd pushed it a little longer, it would have been huge.
Sure. And so then the other thing I think about is that I get not 50%, because there's probably a third in the middle that just sort of understand you can train indoors and outdoors. But I honestly get probably a third where it's like, I don't really understand how you would coach me outdoor for cycling. And I was like, well, I don't know. There's been coaches in cycling races for 100+ years. I don't know. And then there's another that is opposite, right? Is so those people think you can only do it indoors when we have the smart trainer and they have their power meter, and that's the only time you could coach someone. And there's no races and no group rides. It's a very isolated environment. So okay, I get that. And then there's the other people who actually think you could only coach someone in the environment, so outdoors when we're actually racing and have outdoor riding, because they either don't ride indoors or don't care to do it or whatever.
Right, so they'd be the people that, like, if you don't live in their town, like, and literally can
ride with them. Or maybe they
them.
think it's like soccer practice as a kid and you, like, are in person, which, fair enough, I get that, too.
Well, actually, funny enough, we did just post an article on our site, consummateathlete.com, that does talk about, like, what kind of coaching is right for you, and it really goes from, like, that virtual, like, pre-made training plan level to the other extreme of, like, bike skills session where you actually are in person and sort of everything in between.
Right. So I don't know. I just mentioned those examples as sort of what is bike training probably means different depending on where you're coming from. And so this person is then asking, would you do intervals? This is intriguing to me. I want to race a mountain bike, but my coach makes me, or like, whatever, I choose to ride indoors. It might be because that's all you know. It might be what your coach has done. It might be that you live in a place that doesn't really have mountain bike trails, or like Molly's saying, that they're very busy, flat mountain bike trails, so you can't really open it up. Maybe all your mountain bike rides are with people who stop constantly at every trailhead to talk about whatever, or look at their trail forks, on their phone. So it's sort of like what you've been exposed to. But what I usually say is, okay, well, you want to go do intervals. So it's sort of like, well, when you race, is it hard? And are you getting ready for? Usually, if you're not getting ready for a race, it's a different story, I guess. But yeah, when you race, I've seen fat bike races. I've seen all these races where your heart rate goes up and you feel like it's very hard and you're probably pushing lots of power. It might be not steady like a erg mode or something, but it's very hard. So that would be a kind of interval.
Yeah, even in 24-hour racing where you're trying to keep your heart rate down, keep your level like pretty steady, on a mountain bike course, there are still going to be climbs and moments where you're going to have to go harder than you'd maybe prefer to go.
Right. And so then you almost want to think about your training. So when we look at the training week, right, there's lots of easy sessions. The 80% of, 80-20 is sort of this idea of like lots of easy sessions. So those might actually be road. If you live in a very busy or hilly area, yes, sure, those could be on the trainer maybe or on the rollers. But usually you would see a lot of elite athletes will do lots of road or now a bit of gravel training that's less bumpy, more steady. The legs continuously move. The elite riders, it would look like they're riding on an indoor trainer, but they're riding outdoors. They're just so good at staying steady and picking their routes so that it's not super trafficked or up and down. And then the other sessions should become more specific as the race approaches, but those are the intensity sessions, which then we could think about as having physiological intervals, and then we could also think about more specific intervals or key sessions in the week. So we've talked about Molly's training. You usually have like a midweek interval session that doesn't look anything like a 100-miler.
That is correct.
Almost year-round. You have you told us you were doing some 1-minute efforts, I think, coming into this 100-miler.
Yep, that was this week or last week.
But like as fast as you can run, basically, for like there's like 10 by 1 minutes or something.
20, yeah.
Okay. So that, it might be in zones that might be certainly above your threshold running. Those are zone 5 or VO2 or whatever you want to call them. They're pretty hard. They're getting into the hard running, but Molly's will likely not go that fast or that hard during the 100 miles. So those are physiological sessions. We're trying to raise the VO2 max or raise the threshold or raise neuromuscular power or speed. And then on the weekend, though, usually your main key session would be like your Saturday run, which is often, it was 18 miles, it was 25 miles, and it's just like a big, burly, long run because you're getting very close to your key sessions. And probably on the weekends, the only other thing you do sometimes is like finish harder or like 20 minutes hard or
yeah, exactly, like which usually works itself out anyway because there's usually some kind of long climb or like something like that in there where you kind of don't really have a choice.
Yeah, and so those, again, as Molly's getting really close to a race, it's looking more like the race. She's running longer distances around the marathon or the 100-miler pace type thing, like at the aerobic threshold, very specific. So you can almost think about those key sessions as sort of like, is this a physiological session or is this like supposed to be really specific to what you're doing? So if we give the mountain bike example, then if I was doing a 24-hour race, again, I might do 5 by 2 minute hill intervals midweek. Very physiological. Never would you go that hard in the 24 hours if you're doing solo. And then on the weekend, we might do something like 4 hours, similar to what Molly's doing, aerobic. There might be a lot of times with the 24-hour relay stuff, I'll have them do like a 90-minute loop and then do it again just for the sake of pacing, like how was the speed, the time for that loop, and compare it. So then it's a little specific to the event because we are trying to like nail in the heart rate or the pace or the whatever, and then also bring in the fueling and the whatever. So that would be a session like that. And I do also a lot of that, like I call it the hard way home. So you get to the wrong side of the mountain or the hill or the tailwind, and then you have to work really vigorously in the last hour of the ride. So that would be a good way to do that. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, let's say you were doing XC racing. That weekend session might look more like an XC race where we actually do 4 by 8 minutes on a XC course or like several laps on an XC course. So we'll do a lot of like slow, medium, hard, max XC race loops. I often will shorten it down so it's not quite as long as most XC courses. So something like an 8 or a 10 or a 12-minute interval. And then the recoveries can be customizable. You might take 5 minutes off, or we might just roll right into the next lap, and it might almost look like an XC race that you've just sort of eased your way into. But those weekend sessions, again, are looking very specific to the race. So that's how I sort of think about the week and the mountain bike intensity. And hopefully that makes sense. So it's just sort of like looks like the race. Did you want to talk? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that generally answers it, but I mean, I think the question does come back to what I was asking earlier, which is just like, if you're not a super skilled mountain biker, how do you think about doing an interval on a trail? Or would you do most of it on more of like a gravel hill or a rail trail or something like that? Even though then you're going to be racing on a single track that maybe you aren't amazing at. So I think there's arguments for doing both directions.
Sure. Yeah. So every week I say once or twice a week, I go to our local hill. It's 12th line, 6-line extension. And I go up it several times. Sometimes I'll continue on and go onto the mountain bike trails afterwards, but mostly it's up and down a gravel hill. Now, I always give the example of like, if you look at any World Cup, if you look at most marathon mountain bike races, how much of that is on grass in a park or on gravel, crushed gravel, climb trail that just is not very technical. Most things have a lot of that. So you want to think about like where are those critical moments in the race and prepare for that. Especially in that midweek session or any of the physiological sessions, you do want to have the power being good. Again, we've talked about Molly doing hers maybe on crushed gravel or on the pavement even. A lot of 100-mile runners will even do track sessions for that speed work or that physiological session. But to Molly's point, there's sort of a chicken and the egg there, isn't there? Where it's, if you're going to have to race on something like that, then you probably need to go hard on it to practice it. And that's like embedded skill training. So that might take a bit of a perspective change where, yes, you may have to jump off your bike and jump back on, but it sounds like that might happen in the race that you're doing. The other thing would be just choosing a different path if it's not relevant to the race.
For sure. And I think in that case, I think that's where shifting to thinking about perceived exertion and heart rate rather than power is probably really helpful.
Yeah, and maybe that's a key point. Like generally you're not going to use power as much during your mountain bike intervals, but afterwards you can certainly like look at those. There's still valuable information there. But with mountain biking, you actually have the option that the power could actually go down in some cases if you're more efficient too. You might cover the same section of trail faster, but put out more power. Sometimes, often more power is going to make you go faster, but that could be the situation. And I'll also say to people, okay, yeah, it's technical, and you had to dab or put your foot down 3 times. But wouldn't it be fantastic if after this next month, every Wednesday you go out and you do 5x2 minutes up this sort of techie bit, and you put your foot down 3 times in the first week, 2 times in the second week, 1 time. Wouldn't that be just amazing progression if suddenly you clear the section 5 times in a row while working hard and getting very tired? That strikes me as perhaps the best training you could do. So I think that's okay to embed it like that. But for some of the people who are very technical limited, I think you also probably should separate those sessions where you have a good, double track gravel hill interval where you're getting the physiological benefit. And then probably you go work on your skills training another day of the week.
For sure, yeah.
So maybe just to finish off, when we're listing out, so we talked about sort of an endurance interval. This might be akin to tempo, where we're riding off-road. Most off-road training is hard. So when people tell me zone 2 mountain biking, I like immediately try and shut it down because that's not a thing. It just is hard for anyone, even the fittest people, to ride off-road without having surges and coasting. So we don't really talk about zone 2 because if you looked at it, you would be accumulating not very much time in that zone. So it's not worth saying. I always caveat as that's not bad, but it's just not that, right? So it could be a low intensity or lower intensity. Usually it's getting into moderate, if not hard, for most people to ride off-road. Like if your threshold sounds like 200 or 220 or 230 or 240, mountain biking is hard for you.
I think it's funny because I think most people do the mental math of like, well, I was in zone 1 for 80% of the time
average.
and zone 4 for 20%.
Yeah.
So the average was zone 2. So therefore it was a zone 2 ride. That's not how zone 2 works.
No, I don't think so. Like maybe someone would disagree or like they choose to use heart rate in that situation. And I think you just do the best you can when you live in the city or whatever. But I just don't think that's what that is for most people. So I think... Like,
look, we're not saying it has to be 100% in zone 2 to count as a zone 2 ride. I think there's probably like a 15%, 20% like error, margin.
Or like we've done one on the surging, right, of out of zone 2, and we're like, we don't think that's a big deal. That's the stance that we have.
But on the mountain bike, I think, yeah, most people, you're either in zone 1 or you're redlined a lot of the time.
Well, and that's the trick often when I have mountain bikers come to me, especially if they're like pure mountain bikers, is we start adding in some road or gravel or path riding, maybe even on their mountain bike, interspersed between the mountain bike days. And now we have a nice, you could call it polarized, an 80-20, some low, high, off, where not every day is sort of like a moderate training that's really vibrational, lots of muscular upper body work, where you're just sort of tired, but you're not really getting speed work, physiological stimulation, and you're not getting endurance physiological stimulation. You're literally, the cliche of endurance training is this moderate training in the middle, regression to the mean. And so that's the trick. You just make the mountain bikers, somehow you trick them into doing some road training. So we get the volume and the endurance, and then we do a little harder intervals. We trick them into doing actual fast work that's got a bit of focus to it. And everyone's focus and structure is a little different. It doesn't have to be perfect structure, but it might be go up these 4 hills today in your ride and do it quickly. Like we want to see that heart rate up or that breathing up, that RPE up. And that can be fantastic. That's probably a good amount of focus for a lot of people. So did you want to just, to finish off, sort of like go through like sort of typical mountain bike intervals then?
Yes, but let me add one more point to why you should be doing your intervals on your mountain bike outside, because I think the one thing we haven't talked about is, my coach has had me do intervals on the trainer, but you've talked about doing mountain bike intervals. The other reason to do the intervals on your mountain bike is because at some point with this racing, you are going to have to go hard on your mountain bike. If you only ever go hard on your indoor trainer, I assume for most people that's not their mountain bike. I assume a lot of people have their road bike, their gravel bike, whatever, is the one that's inside on the trainer. So even from like a bike fit and like, bike comfort, aerodynamics, all of that, even actually to your point about the shaking, all of that is going to be something that's going to be very, very irritating on race day if you've never really done a lot of hard work on the bike that you're racing. Mm-hmm. So again, this is that specificity, especially as the event gets closer. Like in the winter, sure, makes perfect sense to do intervals indoors on the trainer. As the event's getting closer, it definitely makes sense to be doing them outside on the mountain bike so you know how it feels to be going hard. Is that vibration too much in your hands? Do you need different gloves? Is your seat height actually comfortable for going hard? Or when you do start going up a hill, does it start getting a little funky?
Is that why you have your back pain and your hamstrings are cramping? Sure. I mean, that's not, and then there's also the, can you steer around the trees? Like when people do all these road miles and have the big engine, so I'm pretty psyched because they're usually not going to find traction. They're going to crash into a tree. It's going to be great. It works out for me. Unless
as a racer, not a coach.
If I'm racing them, yeah, it's not great if I'm coaching. But yeah, so I mean, I think I generally do. That's the trick. You put people on the hot set. This is what Dan Cleather calls hot sessions, but your key sessions of the week. Joe Friel would call them breakthrough sessions, especially as we get into those last 2 or 3 months before the competitive season, the A race. It should look like the training. This is specificity. Like it seems obvious, but then you'll see people do the opposite of what we're talking about. Even the 80-20 polarized, people will nod their head, but then completely just regress to the mean, which is, I guess, what you would expect with regression to the mean. Most people are average. Everyone's a great driver, above average. So
I'm a fantastic driver.
Right. Okay, so then just to finish off, so 5 by 2 minutes. Pick the local hill, go up it 3 to 5 times. Works for most people. If your hill's a mountain, you can just go up the mountain and make intervals that way. I think the off-road off-road time trials is something I don't see a lot of coaches use, but I think is just, again, specific. It just makes, you can do it any different number of ways. There can be any different number of recoveries, from no recovery between to lots of recovery, 10 minutes of recovery between, like a big anaerobic max, first lap effort. Those I think are bread and butter. They can be overdone. I wouldn't do them every week necessarily, but I think those are great ones to put in, especially for people who don't race very much. If you race, then you sort of are already doing this. And weekly races are probably the best format for that. You get 40 minutes, 2 to 4 laps. People are around you. You learn how to start. Fantastic. What else do? We talked about the longer, like your 24-hour marathon racer type long tempos, finish the workout hard. ride your race pace. We're really grooving, whether it's by heart rate or normalized power or perceived exertion or however you want to pace yourself. Like Molly, we practice and we practice every Saturday or every Sunday or whatever your day is. Am I missing? Oh, and then start sprints and just sprints for mountain bikers, especially your XCO, short track, on the shorter side of things. There is so much time. The start is so important to predicting the outcome of the race that we have to do a lot of start efforts. And it's like strength training and all this other stuff we don't do. If you go back to one of the Dan John podcasts, he asked me on the spot, like, what were the 3 most important things in mountain biking? And one of them we talked about was starts. And he's like, well, how much do you do that in the week? And I'm like, yeah, really not. Just don't do it. And it's okay, well, I think you need to do this like 3 times a week. And that can be sprinkled into warm-ups. It doesn't have to be its own session, but it could be. It could be back and forth across the fields. We do that a little bit, 8 to 10 times, 200 meters, get the time for it and really practice sprinting. But then also just short hill sprints. These, runners might call these strides, something between 8 and 30 seconds of just really, really pushing it. Most people in mountain biking, this is going to be standing. Most people in mountain bike can't stand up. It sounds funny, but it's true. So that would be the other key session that I would have people do, is just like really hard hill reps. And that's overlooked. So those would probably be 4. We sort of going from sprint, VO2, we call it threshold or race pace for those off-road hill stuff, and then out to your tempo marathon type efforts. And all athletes probably should do a sprinkling of those types of workouts, but you'll have a different emphasis whether you're Molly doing 100 milers or you're an XCO, sprint short track specialist.
All right, perfect. All right, last question here. Stopping during training. At what point does it become 2 training rides versus 1 ride with a prolonged stop in it?
Mm-hmm. And then there was sort of the embedded question there of static versus active or passive. Is that what are the words for those? Do you stop and sit between your recoveries, or are you doing active spinning between your recoveries? So in cycling, we don't see this as much unless you're a track cyclist, probably.
Yeah, for sure. I've never really been confronted by that. I've certainly been on, when I was on Rutgers Cycling, our Sunday Century was the thing for training in the early spring. And, it always involved probably nearly 45 minutes to an hour at a coffee shop. When you have a group of 15 and you're in a busy coffee shop, it just takes that long for everyone to get their snack, use the washroom, take off 18 layers in order to use the washroom, etc.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Most stops are like that for sure that I've seen in people's group rides.
So, when does it start being 2 separate rides? And part of it, let's just caveat this with it depends on your goals. Mm-hmm. So, in the case of that Rutgers Cycling thing, I would have counted it as a single ride. Sure, it had a really long stop, but the point was really just to have a long day on the bike. There was no sort of training stimulus or goal beyond that.
Sure. So, yeah, it's one of these things. It doesn't really matter that much.
But if I'd been training for Ironman specifically, then that probably would have been 2 separate rides, because that wouldn't really be the specific thing that I was doing.
Mm-hmm. So it's, something like that, I would say you can just press stop or pause and carry on, but you'll see people go even longer, and they'll even have a beer and a taco or a beer and a burrito. And so that was...
Okay, whenever a beer is involved, unless it's an athletic brewing, non-alcoholic beer, side note, please sponsor us. If you have a beer, it's now 2 rides.
Or you change your clothes or something, yeah. So you'll see people, so what are the iterations and where does this matter? The start, stop, so you shouldn't use auto pause. And so definitely if you do it or your coach hasn't got the memo, show them Google Training Peaks and auto pause, and it's not recommended. We have a post on this as well. It is super contentious, and I apologize if you disagree. But it's not great from data. I also don't like it even just from a philosophical standpoint, where chamois time is training time. I think if you're out there, you should be doing it. And so embedded in that belief, though, is this thing that probably when we're training, we should go training. And I think if we think about that last concept we were talking about, where there's the hot sessions or the key sessions, those I think you want to be training and then stop for coffee after or whatever. But you do want those key sessions. Molly doesn't stop during her 25 miler, very, very minimal. She gets super irritated with me if I'm even navigating for more than like a minute.
It is so frustrating.
So that's the idea, because in the 100-miler, that's one of our things is everyone we work with who is doing long stuff and wants to do the best they can, we minimize the stop time. And we've talked about that on other podcasts.
Yeah, the less time you have at zero, the higher your average stays. Even if it's like a shuffle walk, like that's, during this 100-miler, as I'm doing transitions, you are going to hand me a pack. I am going to keep walking as I take off my old pack, switch stuff.
Mostly. And there'll be a few longer ones where maybe, and there's always something goes wrong. We have to do
troubleshooting, for
foot
sure.
maintenance or change shorts or whatever. It's pouring rain, whatever. There's those situations, but your most of the stops are minimal, and we try and just like keep you moving, right? In the same way that a mountain bike race, you just take your bottle and you carry on, because we know that not going 0 kilometers an hour or miles per hour is going to be better for the average speed and the finish time. Of course, if that affects your finish time because you start crying and like have to sit down in a ditch further on down the trail, then I guess there's exceptions. But this is why we want to prepare for this, so that mentally we're not used to sitting in a chair or sitting, every hour we ride, we stop and have a coffee, because we're preparing for the race. The other exception, though, is you should have fun. And if you like going for a beer on Sundays with your friends as part of your ride, or a coffee or your pastry stop, that is completely fine. I'm not saying you're not allowed to do that, but for strictly the sake of the data recording, at some point the stop gets long enough, you can just stop the ride, save it, and start a new ride. That would probably just make the most sense. But that's, I don't really care too much about that. That's not a huge deal. But more this question is asking, I think, is, so there was the length of the stop. So the beer and burrito rule is an Andy Kogan thing that sort of looks at that. But I don't know if I have any other like hard and fast rules, just that in general, the coach is probably not expecting you to stop working or stop pedaling during the ride.
Yeah, for sure. So I think like unless it is specifically indicated, especially if you're doing a workout that is, a certain 4 laps of this course, or
4 intervals, or
4 intervals,
mileage or whatever.
Yeah, the assumption is that if you do stop, it's like to very quickly, troubleshoot, fill up, whatever, hit the bathroom, continue on. I think this is where, the sitting, basically as soon as you sit down, like that's kind of against the point of the workout, unless of course, like I said, you're changing shoes or, have to do something like that.
Yeah. Now, I would say the extreme, which is what we're all copying in some ways, is this like European cyclists at the cafe. And so, for sure, if you're out for many hours, you probably have to stop to refill bottles. So then that's part of the coffee stop. You grab a coffee, you refocus mentally. But I see this being for those who are, I don't even want to put a real limit on it, but we used to do 5 hours. You would stop around 3, sort of halfway, something like that. But if you can carry all the fuel, then there's not really a need to stop. And certainly you could stop at the end, or have a beer when you get home, or a coffee when you get home, whatever the thing is. And so that would be the question strictly from a training perspective, again, with the caveat that you're allowed to have fun with your friends and have fun biking and, ride for ice cream and bike back and jump in a lake. All these things are great. But strictly from like a training perspective, I don't think you're going to see a plan that like includes a lunch break or a passive recovery.
For sure, yeah. Well, I think about this coming back to triathlon and like my roots, I guess, like that's sort of like doing that kind of stop mid-ride, like mid, workout that you're doing is sort of akin to doing a brick workout where you stop and have lunch between the bike and the run, right? Like, so instead of doing the quick transition, which is sort of the point of it, to like continue on tired, you're just stopping and like restarting. So again, it's not that the bike or the run is like a bad workout per se, but it's just they're 2 separate workouts instead of being part of a brick. I think that's just like an easier way to kind of.
Some people, I completely agree with you, but some people do call like the day a brick or something. But yeah,
nope, that is not a thing.
Yeah, that's a double where you just have 2 sports in your double, but
which is also very important, but is not a brick.
right, yeah.
Like, are you miserable and are your shoes kind of soggy? Yes, that's a brick.
I hadn't thought about those for a while, and then someone was like, "What is the brick?" Because Training Peaks actually, I'm pretty sure, still has a brick as an icon, so you can have bike, mountain bike, run, swim, and then there's a brick. And so to Molly's point, that is a single workout that you're putting the brick on, but it's just a picture of a brick.
I love that.
So someone who's just been a cyclist or a mountain biker wouldn't have any context for that. And they're like, what do you do in that workout?
Well, you go down to your local...
Yeah, you just carry the brick. You just carry it around. Which is also a workout, I guess. Maybe I should use that for rucking or something.
Oh, I like that.
Okay, just change. We'll just reclaim brick for something else. So the related thing then we've hinted at here is passive versus active recovery. So most of the time in cycling and endurance cycling, you don't ever see passive recoveries too much. You'll see some of those workouts we were just talking about in that previous thing, that off-road time trial where you have a big, long 10-minute recovery. If we're doing a full race start again, sometimes I'll have people stop so that you're experiencing sort of those legs and the cooling down, and then you have to go really hard from a standing race start again. So sometimes I'll do that. Sometimes in those sprint workouts, we'll take more like a track cyclist might sit and wait for the next track interval or track race or whatever. They do a lot of sitting or just spinning on rollers, and then they're sitting waiting for the start, and they do a standing start. So in those cases, sometimes when it looks like track cycling, where it's maximal for a short distance, you'll see more of those passive recoveries. But those are pretty niche, and you don't really see them in much other mountain bike endurance training where there's a passive, so coasting or standing practice. Now, I guess in mountain biking, you might actually see somewhat passive because we're just cruising back down a hill in a hill interval. That could be another passive where your legs aren't really doing anything, but it's not really passive in its true sense. So yeah, I think in general you're going to assume this question sort of came up because someone thought that, oh yeah, I'll just wait between these laps or these intervals, and in general you don't do that. You keep riding or whatever, right? There's sort of like a recovery window or not. Sometimes you'll see, again, it's like easy lap, medium lap, hard lap, and there is no recovery.
But it is understandable where you'd read that, laps, especially if you are kind of coming from a relay racing background or something like that, where you do assume like there is, time to stop, and that's fine. And it is fine. It's just going to be a different physiological benefit and different psychological benefit too.
Well, that's it. And so that's, again, when you're preparing for something specific, if it doesn't look like that, if you were preparing for a 4-person relay, maybe that's the best training, is you actually see what kind of food you can get down your stomach in the break and get it digested by the time you have to go really hard again. But for someone who's doing something continuous, to Molly's point, I think you're going to have to cope with the fact that you have to sit on your bike for an extended period of time. And we only get so many of those long weekend sessions to do it. So I just don't know that that's the one I would use for the coffee, beer, and burrito versus maybe the Monday or Friday optional recovery spins could be the spot.
For sure. All right, let's wrap up there. Let us know if you have any questions. Again, if you're in the Hamilton area, come hang out at Sulphur Springs this weekend.
And definitely if you know any young women, let them know about that Shred Girls event coming up on the May 31st as well down in Mansfield. If it's not far from Toronto, the GTA, so that would be great if you could share that around. Even if it's not directly related for you, try and share that around for us. We appreciate that. And a final note that I wanted to add here too is that we have a question, an anonymous question form that you can link out of the show notes. So that should be in your podcast player and on the post on our page on consummateathlete.com. And so that will let you ask the question without putting your name or your email on it, which I think a few people would prefer. So hopefully that'll help us get a few more Q&A questions, and we appreciate those in advance.
Perfect. Links to all of that in the show notes. And with that, we'll see you next week. Happy training. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. If you want to hear more training, racing, and endurance sport advice, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. You can also subscribe to our newsletter at consummateathlete.com for a weekly dose of inspiration and advice straight to your inbox.